We're at the Mishnah on DAF Ayin Hey and Aleph. The logistics are a little bit complicated, so I ask that you, if you have a diagram in front of you, great. Conceptually, the illustration is not hard to imagine because we're only going to be dealing, at least initially, we're only going to be dealing with two chutzers. Shtei chatzero zu lifnim mizu. If you have two chutzers, one in the interior and one in the exterior, one inner chutzer, one outer chutzer. Now, what we mean by inner and outer is that the inner chutzer has to traverse the outer chutzer in order to get out to the street, in order to get out to the mavoi. The outer chutzer, therefore, not only services the residents of the outer chutzer, but it also serves as a throughway for the residents of the inner chutzer. So in that sense, the residents of the inner chutzner are stakeholders in the outer chutzner. Am I making myself clear? To what degree they are stakeholders in the outer chutzner is the subject of debate of our Mishnah. So irva hapenimis velo irva hachitzona. The members of the inner chutzner make an eruv. The members of the outer chutzner, however, do not make an eruv. Hapenimis muteres v'hachitzona asura. Then logically, of course, this is fairly self-evident. The people of the inner chutzner, because they made their own eruv, they can carry in their own chutzner. The people of the outer chutzner did not make an eruv, and therefore they cannot carry. Hachitzona v'lo hapnimis shtein asuras. But here's the flip side. Let's say the outer chutzner made an eruv, but the members of the inner chutzner did not make an eruv. Because the members of the inner chutzner are stakeholders in the outer chutzner because they need it as their throughway, they did not make an eruv, and therefore, since they're stakeholders in the outer chutzner, they disqualify the members of the outer chutzner from carrying because they did not make an eruv together with them. Now, ir v'zula atzma zu muteres b'fnei atzma v'zu muteres b'fnei atzma. If, however, the members of the inner chutzner make their own eruv, the members of the outer chutzner make their own eruv, then it's okay for each chutzner to carry respectively in their own chutzner. Now, why is that? What about the fact that the members of the inner chutzner are stakeholders in the outer chutzner, and they didn't make an eruv together? So what we're seeing from here is a very important distinction. And the Gemara is going to identify this distinction as follows. When I'm allowed to carry in my own chutzner, I don't impede the other chutzner where I'm a stakeholder from carrying. But when I'm not allowed to carry in my own chutzner, then because I'm a stakeholder in another chutzner, I do impede the members of the other chutzner from carrying. Okay, that's the distinction that is being drawn here. Now we're going to see the Gemara is going to take some time to get to that conclusion. I'm giving you the bottom line. Rabbi Akiva oser hachitzona. Rabbi Akiva says that no, that even in a case where the members of the inner chutzner made their own eruv, the members of the outer chutzner are still not allowed to carry shadrisas haregel osrasa, because according to Rabbi Akiva, anytime you have someone who uses the outer chutzner as their throughway, if you didn't make an eruv with them, then sorry, outer chutzner, you can't carry. The fact that you have other stakeholders, regardless of what they're doing in their own chutzner, they impede you from carrying. So this is a machlokus between the Tanakama and Rabbi Akiva. Now we seemingly have a third opinion, which is v'chachamim omrim, ein drisas haregel osrasa. And they say that the fact that they have access to walk through the outer chutzner does not impede the members of the outer chutzner from carrying. Now it sounds like the Chachamim are saying the same thing as the Tanakama. So we have to also identify what the machlokus is between the two of them. Now, shachach echad min hachitzona velo irev hapenimis muteres v'hachitzona asura. Next case. Let's say, now we're going back to the Shita of the Tanakama. Let's say each chutzner made its own eruv separately. However, one person in the inner chutzner forgot to contribute a piece of bread for the eruv. So, hapenimis muteres, shachach echad min hachitzona, one of the members of the outer chutzner, I beg your pardon, one of the members of the outer chutzner forgot to contribute. So you've got a kosher eruv in the inner chutzner, you've got a non-kosher eruv in the outer chutzner because you don't have one corporate entity in the outer chutzner. Hapenimis muteres v'hachitzona asura. So the members of the inner chutz are allowed to carry. The members of the outer... Ted, good morning. Ted?
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Thanks God, good.
Good. Sorry to bother you. It's a little bit warm in here. Is there...
Okay, Rabbi, 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. V'hachitzona asura.
Shabbos strict. You didn't tell him what you wanted, but he understood right away.
That's true. I didn't think of it. I'm so used to saying it that way.
Good. It's a good habit. I'm loosening my tie.
You don't say good morning in Polish to him.
How do you say good morning in Polish?
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Okay. Shkayach. Hapinimus muteres v'hachitzon asura. So therefore, since the people in the outer chutzner do not have a duly constituted eruv, they're not allowed to carry. But there's no problem for the inner chutzner to carry because they have a properly constituted eruv. However, min hapinimus v'lo irev shtehem asuros. If, however, the members of the inner chutzner did not properly constitute their eruv, because one member forgot to contribute his bread, so now you have, instead of one entity, you have more than one entity in the inner chutzner. So not only can the members of the inner chutzner not carry, but because they cannot carry in their own chutzner, they also impede the outer chutzner where they have a stake, where they are stakeholders. Okay? So everything is logical up until now. Nasnu eruvan b'makom echad v'shachet echad bein min hapnimis bein min hachitzona v'lo irev shtein asuros. Let's say now we have another case. Let's say the members of the inner chutzner and the outer chutzner decide that they want to incorporate together and make one big eruv for both chutzers together because the two chutzers are connected. That's okay. If, however, one of the people forgets and to contribute a piece of bread for the eruv, just one person of either chutzer, so since they put their eruv in one place, and as the Gemara will clarify, they put their eruv in the outer chutzer, so that impedes, since one person forgot to contribute, that impedes the eruv for working for anybody, and no one's allowed to carry. And finally, the final case is, let's say the inner chutzner and the outer chutzner do not have multiple residents. Let's say there's only one resident for the inner chutzner and one resident for the outer chutzner. Then there's no eruv that needs to be made. Because, as the Tanakama had said, the inner chutzner is allowed to carry, and the outer chutzner is allowed to carry, because according to the Tanakama, as long as the stakeholder in the outer chutzner is allowed to carry in his own chutzner, so he doesn't impede the outer chutzner from carrying also. Let us go on to the Gemara. Now, the Gemara is going to say something odd that at face value is not going to be consistent with our Mishnah. The Gemara is going to work on trying to make it consistent. Ki asa Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yanai zu divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rav Dimi says in the name of Rabbi Yanai, our entire Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Akiva. Da Amar afilu regel hamuteres b'makoma osera shelo b'makoma. So now we have a terminology that I've spoken out in English, which is that there's two concepts, regel hamuteres and regel ha'asura. Regel hamuteres means that I'm allowed to carry in my own chutzner, and therefore I either do impede or I don't impede the other chutzner where I am a stakeholder. Now, regel asura means that I'm not allowed to carry in my own chutzner. So just remember those terms. Regel muteris means I'm allowed to carry in my own chutzner, and regel asura means I'm not allowed to carry in my own chutzner. So therefore, regel muteris b'makoma, if a person is a stakeholder in another chutzner, but he's allowed to carry in his own domain, so then oseres shelo b'makoma. What's that?
Need a little down, Rabbi?
Need a little cooler, please. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Oseres shelo b'makoma. So then it impedes, according to Rabbi Akiva, regardless of whether you're allowed to carry in your own chutzner or not, if you're a stakeholder because you have passage rights through the outer chutzner, you always impede the outer chutzner from having an eruv, from having a kosher eruv. According to Rabbi Akiva, it makes no difference whether you're allowed to carry in your own chutzner or not. The fact that you have passage rights through the outer chutzner means that you automatically impede the outer chutzner from carrying. That's according to Rabbi Akiva. Aval chachamim omrim kishem sheregel hamuteres eina oseres kach regel hasura eina oseres. But the chachamim disagree with Rabbi Akiva, and the chachamim hold that rights of passage never create an impediment for the outer chutzner for carrying. and it makes no difference whether you're allowed to carry in your own chutzner, in your own inner chutzner or not, by virtue of the fact that that you're a stakeholder, it just by rites of passage, does not it cause you to impede the outer chutzner from carrying. According to Rav Dimi's interpretation of Rabbi Yanai, it turns out that there is no distinction whether you're allowed to carry in your own chutzner or not. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, whether you have regel asura or regel hamuteres, b'makoma, either way, you always will impede the outer chutzner from carrying. And according to the Chachamim, it makes no difference whether you're regel muteres or regel asura, you always will not impede the outer chutzner from carrying. So the Gemara now says that's not going to hold up to scrutiny of our Mishnah. Now let's take a look at the language of our Mishnah. Tanan, irva chitzona velo pinimis shteyan asuras. The Mishnah had said that if the outer eruv had made a duly constituted eruv, but the inner eruv, the inner chutzner did not make an eruv, so then neither party is allowed to carry. So money. So who does that part of the Mishnah go according to? Ilay Rebbe Akiva, my ir regel asura, filo regel muteres nami. If it's going according to Rebbe Akiva, then why did you have to tell me that only when the inner chutzner did not make an eruv is it usher for the people in the outer chutzner to carry? Even if the inner chutzner made an eruv, it's going to be usher, because according to Rebbe Akiva, regardless of what their status is in the inner eruv, they always impede the outer chutzner from carrying. So why dafka did you choose this case? Elolav Rabbanan. So you see this goes according to the Chachamim, and you see that the Chachamim draw a distinction between whether the inner chutzner made an eruv or not. So you see there is this distinction between regel muteris and regel asura. The Gemara says no. La'olam Rabbi Akiva velozu afzu katani. Really, no. Really, the whole Mishnah is according to Rabbi Akiva, as I said. And velozu afzu katani. And it's telling you multiple cases, it's telling you the smaller chiddush so that you'll eventually work to the bigger chiddush. Meaning that it's true that not only when the inner eruv cannot carry in their own chutzner do they impede the outer chutzner, but even when they are allowed to carry in their own chutzner, they also impede. So the Mishnah is giving you one of those two cases, but in Hachinami, even when the inner chutzner made an eruv, they also impede the outer chutzner from carrying. Okay, let's look at the next line. Tanan ir v'zula atzma v'zula atzma zumu teres b'fnei atzma v'zumu teres b'fnei atzma. Let's look at the next line of the Mishnah. When the inner chutzner makes its own eruv and the outer chutzner makes its own eruv, each chutzner is allowed to carry on its own turf. Taima de'irva. But that's only true because the inner chutzner made its own eruv. Halo irva shteyan asuros. But if the inner chutzner would not have made its own eruv, then they would impede the outer chutzner from carrying. So what do you see? You see that a distinction is being drawn in our Mishnah between regel hamuteres and regel ha'asura. V'ha haitana da'ama regel hamuteres eina oseres, regel ha'asura oseres. You see that our Tana holds of this distinction. So money, who does that go according to? Money, who is this? Ilay Rebbe Akiva hi afilu regel hamuteres nami. If it's according to Rabbi Akiva says that even when the inner chutzner made its own eruv, they still impede the outer chutzner from carrying. So elolav rabbanon hi. So you see that it's the Chachamim, and according to the Chachamim, you do distinguish between regel hasur and regel hamuteres. Va'od midasefer Rabbi Akiva, reishalav Rabbi Akiva, and therefore, and then let me ask you another question. The very fact that you have a machlokis in our Mishnah between the Tanakama and Rabbi Akiva implies that the Tanakama is not Rabbi Akiva. So how can you say that the whole Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Akiva? That's my question. So the Gemara says, Kula Rabbi Akiva hi v'chisuri machzor avahachi ketani. So you have to say that, no, there's a little piece missing from our Mishnah. Really, the whole Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, and you have to read it as follows. And I grant you this is very contrived, but we're trying to be able to reconcile Rav Dimi's teaching with our Mishnah. You read the Mishnah as follows: Ir v'zula atzma, zumu teres b'fnei atzma, v'zumu teres b'fnei atzma. That if each chutzner made its own eruv, each respective chutzner is allowed to carry in its own turf. But that's only true when they created an impediment, a blockage between the two chutzers in the doorway, to demonstrate before Shabbos that the members of the inner chutzner did not plan to use the outer chutzner as a passageway. Only under those circumstances does the inner chutzner not impede the outer chutzner from carrying. Avalo asa sadaka chitzona asura divrei Rabbi Akiva. But if there was no impediment placed in that doorway between the two chatzers, then the inner chutzner will be able to carry, the outer chutzner will not be able to carry. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva always asers the outer chutzner when the inner chutzner has rights of passage through the outer chutzner. It makes no difference whether the inner chutzner made their eruv or not. The Chachamim omrim, but the Chachamim disagree and they say, Ein drisas haregel oseres. The Chachamim say that no, that rites of passage do not create an impediment for the Chatzar to be able to create an Eruv. So again, Rav Dimi is holding his ground. So Masav Rav Bibi bar Abaya. So now let's look at the next line, says Rav Bibi. V'im hayu shel yechidim ein tzrichin la'arev. The latter part of our Mishnah had said that if each Chatzar is occupied by one resident, then you don't need to make an Eruv. Hashel Rabim Srichin la'arev. But if you see that if it belongs to multiple parties, then you do have to make an Eruv. In order for the outer Chatzar to be able to carry, you'd have to make an Eruv on the inner Chatzar. So Alma Regel Hamuteres b'Makoma Eina Oseres Regel Hasura Oseres. So what do you see from that? You see something very, very simple. That when the inner Chatzar has made its own Eruv, and they're called therefore Regel Hamuteres, they do not impede the outer Chatzar. But if it's Regel HaAsura, which means the inner Chatzar is not allowed to carry on its own turf, then they also impede the outer Chatzar from carrying. So you see that the Mishnah clearly holds of this distinction. Va'od Masiv Ravina. Now let's look at another line from the Mishnah. Now says Ravina. Shachach echad min hachitzona velo irev. That if one of the members of the outer Chatzar forgot and did not contribute to the Eruv, hapinimis muteres v'chitzana asura, then the inner Chatzar can carry, but the outer Chatzar cannot. Shachach echad min hapinimis, but if someone on the inner Chatzar forgot to contribute, velo irev, shtein asuros, then both the inner and the outer cannot carry, even if the outer made its own Eruv. So taima d'shachach. So the only reason why the inner Chatzar impedes the outer Chatzar is because they didn't properly make an Eruv. Halo shachach shtein mutaros. But if the inner Chatzar did make a proper Eruv, so then it would be permitted to carry both in the inner Chatzar and in the outer Chatzar. So Alma Regel Hamuteres Eina Oseres Regel Hasura Oseres. So once again, you see this distinction, that when the inner Chatzar can carry on its own turf, they don't impede the outer Chatzar. When they cannot carry on their own turf, they do impede the outer Chatzar. You see this distinction between Regel Hasura and Regel Hamuteres. How can you, Rav Dimi, therefore suggest that no one holds of that distinction? So Elaki Asa Rabin Amar Rabbi Yanai, so rather Rabin, who was another disciple of Rabbi Yanai, modified Rabbi Yanai's position and said as follows: Gimel Machlokas Bedavar. There's not two positions, there's three positions. Tanakama Savar Regel Hamuteres Eina Oseres Regel Haasura Oseres. Really, the Tanakama of our Mishnah does hold of this distinction. When the inner Chatzar can carry on its own turf, they do not impede the outer Chatzar. When they cannot carry on their own turf, they do impede the outer Chatzar. Rabbi Akiva Savar Afilu Regel Hamuteres Oseres. Rabbi Akiva is the most machmir, and he says that regardless of whether they can carry on their own turf or not, the fact that they are stakeholders by having rights of passage to the outer Chatzar means that they impede the outer Chatzar irrespective. And V'Rabbanon Basroi Savri Kishem Sheregel Muteres Eino Oseres Kach Regel Asura Eino Oseres. And then you have the Chachamim Omrim, which is the third opinion of our Mishnah. As I told you, we would get there eventually. The Chachamim say that no, rights of passage is not enough of a stakeholder to impede the outer Chatzar from being able to carry. So regardless of whether the members of the inner Chatzar made their own Eruv or not, they never impede the outer Chatzar from being able to carry. Weiter. Nasnu Eruvim b'makom echad v'shachach echad beinim ha'penimis beinim ha'chitzona. The Mishnah had said shtein asuros, that if the members of the inner and outer Chatzar decided to incorporate together, and one of the members of either Chatzar forgot to contribute, then no one's allowed to carry. Now, when we said, what did we say? We said that they put their Eruv in one place. So the Gemara now says, my makom echad, which place did they put the Eruv in? So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, chitzona. So Rav explains, they put the Eruv in the outer Chatzar. Now Rashi clarifies, if they had put the Eruv in the inner Chatzar, and one of the members of the outer Chatzar forgot to contribute, so then it would still be okay for the members of the inner Eruv to carry. Why? Because everyone in the inner Eruv contributed, inner Chatzar rather, contributed to the Eruv, and the Eruv itself is located on the inner Chatzar. As such, we can consider this to be the corporate entity for exclusively the inner Chatzar, and to enable us all to carry. But once we put the food parcel in the outer Chatzar, then even if every member of the inner Chatzar contributed to it, but the fact that we placed our food in the outer Chatzar, and the outer Chatzar has more than one entity because one guy forgot to contribute, means that it's for Falun for everybody. The Eruv won't work now anymore for any of us. Why then did you call it one centralized place? It's really in the outer Chatzar, but it's called a place that is unified for everybody. So now, Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa to support this, that they place the Eruv in the outer Chatzar, because it says, Nosnu Eruvin B'chitzona. The brisa just fleshes out our Mishnah. If they all place the food parcel in the outer Chatzar, V'shachach echad bein min hachitzona bein min hapinimis v'lo irev shtein asuros. And then one of the Chatzar members forgets, and it makes no difference whether he's an inner Chatzar guy or an outer Chatzar guy. It doesn't make a difference. It invalidates the Eruv, and no one is allowed to carry. However, Nasnu Eruvin B'pinimis, but then the Brisa clarifies, if, however, they put the food parcel on the inner Chatzar, V'shachach echad min hapinimis v'lo irev shtein asuros, then it depends. If one of the inner Chatzar guys forgets, so then the Eruv is invalid for everybody. However, min hachitzona v'lo irev shtein asuros divrei Rabbi Akiva. If one of the members of the outer Chatzar forgot to contribute, then only according to Rabbi Akiva is it now usher for everyone to carry. But v'chachamim omrim bezu penimis muteres v'chitzona asura. But the chachamim disagree, and they say no. Look, where is the incorporated food parcel? It is on the inner Chatzar, and they all did contribute the bread. So basically, the Chachamim say you can cordon off the inner Chatzar from the guys in the outer Chatzar. They've got the food, which is the corporate entity. They've got everyone contributing, so therefore they're allowed to carry on the inside. It's only the outside that's not allowed to carry. So Amar le Rabba bar Chanan le Abaya Maishna le Rabbanan Damri Penimis Muteres. So he asked to Abaya, he says, why do the Chachamim say that the inner Chatzar is allowed to carry? Mishum da'achda dasha umishtamsha, because basically they say, let's close the door, meaning let's seal off, or at least mentally, close the door to the outer Chatzar, and use the inner Chatzar to ourselves. We have the food, we have the members who all contributed to the food, and therefore it's our own private Eruv just for our Chatzar, and we can carry. So the Rabbi Akiva nami tiyached dasha v'tishtamesh. Why don't you say the same svar according to Rabbi Akiva? So Amar lei eruv margila. So the answer that he gave, that Abaye gave, was, I'll tell you why. The fact that the members of the outer Chatzar contributed to this food parcel also means that they are now stakeholders in the inner Chatzar. And the fact that not all the members of the outer Chatzar contributed to that Eruv means that they now invalidate the Eruv, because they had one guy who messed it up for the outer Chatzar, they also mess it up for the inner Chatzar as well, since by having their food there, they are now also stakeholders in the inner Chatzar, and you can't just close the door on them. So the Gemara now says, L'Rabbana nami erev margila. Why don't you say that according to the Chacham? What does the Chachamim respond? The Amrila l'tikune shitavticha v'lo le'ivusei. Because we attribute the members of the inner Chatzar saying to the members of the outer Chatzar, I only incorporated with you for rectification purposes, but not for corruption purposes. In other words, I didn't want to become your partner in order to disable me from carrying. I only wanted to become your partner, outer Chatzar, to enable us to carry back and forth. But now that one of your guys messed up, then I no longer, it's retroactively indicated that my partnership was done in error, and therefore it's null and void. Our partnership is null and void. And therefore I'm retaining the food parcel for ourselves, and we don't want to have anything to do with you guys on the outside. And therefore it's okay according to the Rabbanan. So the Rabbi Akiva nami tema l'tikune shitavticha v'lo li'ivusei. So why doesn't Rabbi Akiva hold of that svara? The Amrullah mivatlinan lach rishusi. So the Gemara says, you know what? Rabbi Akiva also agrees that the members of the inner Chatzar are going to be allowed to carry unto themselves, but only after the members of the outer Chatzar formally nullify their stake, their stakeholding in the inner chutzner. In other words, according to Rabbi Akiva, when do we say that everyone's not allowed to carry? Before the members of the outer chutzner have divested their stake in the food parcel on the inner chutzner. But once they say, okay, we hereby divest our stake in the food parcel in the inner chutzner, then the members of the inner chutzner are now allowed to carry. So the Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan say, no, it's not that you require the members of the outer chutzner to divest their portion in the inner chutzner. That doesn't work, because ein bittul reshus mi chutzner lechutzner. Because you can't do that. You can't divest yours. If you're a stakeholder in another chutzner, we don't allow you on Shabbos to divest your stake in that other chutzner. Now, this was a discussion that was undertaken on DAF Samach Vav. There was an extensive discussion on DAF Samach Vav whether a person could be mevatel rishuso mi chutzner lechutzner. Everyone agrees that you're allowed to be mevatel rishus if you're members of the same chutzner. Let's say you and I live in a chutzner, and I forgot to contribute bread to the ERU. So the Chachamim made a special takana that they allowed the guy who forgot to divest his rights of ownership in the chutzner to enable everyone else in the chutzner to carry. So I basically, if I didn't contribute to the corporate entity, I can basically say I hereby nullify any stake that I have, any shareholding stake that I have in this chutzner. It's as if I'm just a guest, and therefore everyone else can carry. However, that's only when you're members of the same chutzner. If you're a stakeholder in another chutzner, according to the Chachamim, you're not allowed to do that. Now, this was a machlokus between Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel. So the Gemara now says, "Leima Shmuel v'Rabbi Yochanan b'plukta d'Rabbanan v'Rabbi Akiva kamiflagi." Then it would seem like that this whole shaila of whether you can divest ownership or divest the stakeholding claim from one chutzner to another on Shabbos, that is a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel on Daf Samach Vav, but we're seeing that this is really rooted in a machlokas Tanoim. It seems that according to Rabbi Akiva you can divest, and according to the Chachamim you cannot divest. And that's why the Chachamim said it's not a question of divestiture, it's really that according to the Chachamim the partnership was never valid from the first place, because the Chachamim's view of it is that I only went into partnership with you guys in the outer chutzner if it was for rectification. But it was never meant to be for corruptive purposes. The Shmuel Amar Kerabanan, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rabbi Akiva. Shmuel, who says that you cannot divest from one chutzner to another, must hold like the Chachamim who say that divestiture doesn't work. And Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, rather, who holds that divestiture does work, holds like Rabbi Akiva, who says that divestiture over here works. The Gemara says, no, not necessarily so. Amar Lacha Shmuel, Ana de Amar Yafilu Rabbi Akiva. Shmuel says, no. I hold, like Rabbi Akiva, that in the case of the inner chutzner and the outer chutzner, divestiture works. When do I say that the divesting from one chutzner to another does not work? Ad kan lo kamer Rabbi Akiva hacha ela b'shtei chatzer zulif nimizu da asra nahadadi. That the only time Rabbi Akiva is lenient and allows the members of the outer chutzner to divest from the members of the inner chutzner is only when you have a scenario where the members of the inner chutzner have to be able to, like Rashi explains, the asran ahadadi al yedei hergel ha'eruv u'mitoch sha'osran mevadlin, right? The very fact that we prohibit each other from carrying in our own chutzner means that I can divest from one chutzner to another. In other words, what was Shmuel's whole svara to say that you cannot divest from one chutzner to another? It was because the Chachamim only created that leniency when absolutely necessary. So here's an example of where it's absolutely necessary, because if we don't allow divestiture, then the members of the inner chutzner are not going to be allowed to carry. So that's gufa where Shmuel says it will work. Aval hasa mika asra nahadadi, but in the normal case of divestiture from one chutzner to another, then the case that was discussed on Daf Samach Vav was not where the divestiture was necessary to enable me to carry in my own domain. It's where you had two chutzers which were both abutting a ruin. And in order to be able to carry from one chutzner to the ruin, the other chutzner has to divest rights of passage to the ruin. That's where Shmuel says you can't do that you don't have a right to divest. Because as long as you can carry in your own chutzner, the Chachamim did not give you a heter to divest in another domain other than your own chutzner. So, and that would explain why Shmuel says, no, I don't disagree with Rabbi Akiva. I hold divestiture in this case will work. And Rabbi Yochanan will tell you the flip side. I who say that divestiture does work, in that case on DAF Samech Vav, will agree that in this case divestiture doesn't work, because Ad kan lo kami rabbanan hacha ela da amrla adim avatlas li ka asras iluy aval hasam ka asras Allah. He says the only time where divestiture works is where the only way to allow rights of passage is through divestiture. But over here, you don't need to resort to divestiture to allow rights of passage, because according to the Chachamim, the partnership was never a partnership in the first place. And that's why divestiture is not necessary to enable the members of the inner chutzner to carry, because they can always argue that this was never a valid partnership to begin with, because the outcome of the partnership would result in not allowing us to carry, and that we never went into partnership with you in the first place. Okay, let's go weiter. That was very confusing, so if you didn't follow, it's perfectly understandable, but it's worth chazering over. Let's go weiter. If each chutzner is occupied by one resident, then it's not necessary for them to make an eruv. Now, what that means is that the total number of occupants of both chutzers combined is how many? Two. Good. Now, of course, 1 + 1 is 2. I asked you a very basic question. Yeah, what? That's what the accountant says, right? So the reason why I asked you such a basic question is because what if there are a total of 3 occupants of both chutzers? So you would say, well, then it should depend, right? What should it depend upon? Where are there 2 and where is there 1? So what would you say? I would say like this. If there's only 1 occupant in the inner chutzner and 2 occupants in the outer chutzner, so then it should be permitted for the one guy in the inner chutzner to carry, and it'll only be usher for the guy in the outer chutzner to carry. And if there's 2 occupants in the inner chutzner and 1 occupant in the outer chutzner, then it'll be usher in both, because the inner chutzner cannot carry because it's 2 occupants and they didn't make an eruv, and the outer chutzner cannot carry because since the 2 guys in the inner chutzner have rights of passage, they impede the outer chutzner from being able to carry. So it should depend where the 2 occupants versus the 1 occupant live. But we're going to see not that way. Amar Rav Yosef, Tani Rabbi, Hayu Gimel Asurim. That Rav Yosef says, there's a brisa that says that if there are 3 occupants total of these 2 chutzers, it makes no difference where the 2 occupants versus the 1 are situated. It's always going to be usher to carry in both chutzers. So Amar Lahu Rav Bibi, Lo Tetzisule. So Rav Bibi says, Nebuch, Rav Yosef had amnesia towards the end of his life. He suffered from memory loss. And Rav Bibi therefore says, don't listen to Rav Yosef, he misquoted the halacha. He doesn't disagree with the statement. He agrees that the statement is true, that whenever there are 3 occupants, it's going to be usher to carry in both chutzers. However, Ana Amrisa Nihala Umishmeda Rav Ada Bar Ahava Amrisa Nihala, that it wasn't said in the name of Rebbe and a brisa, but it was rather said in the name of an Amor, Rav Ada Bar Ahava, and I quoted it to him, and I told him this is Rav Ada Bar Ahava Paskind. Hoel vani kori bahen rabim bechitzona. And the reason is that the reason why we always say that when there are 3 occupants, regardless of whether the 2 occupants are in the outer or the 2 occupants are in the inner, it's always going to be usher to carry in both, is because the language that he uses is ani kore lahen bahen rabim bechitzona. Because I declare a multiplicity in the outer chutzner. And basically, what that means is because, like Rashi explains, Gezerah mishum rabim b'penimis. It's because of a case when there are going to be 2 people in the outer chutzner, you may get confused, and you may say to yourself, well, if we permit a situation for the inner chutzner to carry when there's only 1 occupant in the inner and 2 in the outer, we're going to come to permit the inner chutzner to carry when there are 2 occupants in the inner and 1 occupant in the outer. So basically, the rabbis always made an across-the-board rule that whenever there are more than 2 occupants in the 2 chutzers, we are always going to aser everyone to carry. So Amar Rav Yosef, Mori de Avraham, Rabim berebi ichlefli. So Rav Yosef, when he heard the correction, he says, Oy vey, God of Abraham. He says, now I understand why I messed up, what a blunder I made. When I heard the teaching of Rav Bibi, I thought instead of saying Rabim, he said Rebbe. I didn't hear him say the mem at the end of the word Rabim. And that's why I thought he was quoting a Bryce in the name of Rabbi, but in reality he was just making a statement in the name of Rav Ada bar Ahava that in a scenario where there's a case of Rabbim, a case of many people, or two people in the outer and one in the inner, we will also aser. Ushmuel Amar la'olam muteres ad shushnayim b'pnimis ve'echad b'chitzona. Shmuel, however, disagrees with this gezerah. Shmuel says no. If you have one person on the inner chutzner and two people in the outer chutzner, it'll be permitted for the one person in the inner chutzner to carry, and it's only usher for the outer chutzner. It's only when you have two on the inside and one on the outside that it's usher for both of them. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, v'nachri harehu kirabim. Rabbi Elazar then says that if there's a Gentile who's the individual who's living on the inner chutzner, so he has the same din as if there's two occupants. Now you would say to yourself, why should that be? The guy, if he's one Gentile, so he should, obviously the laws of Shabbos don't apply to him, but he should be no different from one Yisrael. Just like one Yisrael doesn't impede the outer chutzner from carrying, the outer resident of the outer chutzner from carrying, so too a Gentile shouldn't. But Rabbi Elazar doesn't say that. He says if you've got one occupant who's a Gentile in the inner chutzner, one occupant who's a resident in the outer chutzner who's Jewish, the guy on the outside is not allowed to carry. So why is that? Maishno Yisrael delo asar demand yada yada man delo yada sar ve'eru ve'irev. The Gemara says, why is a Jew different? He says, because look, if you see a guy carrying in the outer chutzner, if he's aware that, look, there's only one resident in the inner chutzner, and therefore he doesn't impede the outer chutzner from carrying, well and good. If he doesn't know that there's only one resident on the inner chutzner, when he sees the Yisrael on the outer chutzner carrying, he'll assume that the guys just made an eruv together and it's no problem. So the Gemara says, well, by that argument, nachri namri, amrinan de yada de lo yada savar igurei ago ogar. Well, if that's the case, then why don't you make the same accommodation or the same allowance when there's a Gentile who lives in the inner chutzner? Say, look, someone who knows what the halacha is will say, look, there's only one resident who's a Gentile, one resident on the outside who's Jewish, and therefore the Gentile doesn't impede the outer guy from carrying. If he doesn't know what the living scenario is, but he knows that there's a Gentile on the inner chutzner, so he'll just say to himself, well, the reason why the outer guy is carrying is because he must have given the Gentile on the inside a buck. And he was socher rishus. We learned before that if you share a chutzner with a Gentile, to enable you to carry, you have to pay him to purchase his rights of passage. And therefore it becomes one corporate entity and you're allowed to carry. So why don't you say that, make that assumption over when it's a Gentile also? The Gemara answers, Stam nachri isa de ogar mifapoi. Answers the Gemara, no. He says, look, anytime a Gentile makes money off of the fact that he relinquished his rishus to a Jew by being paid off, that has publicity to it. The Gentile will tell all his friends, hey, look, I just made a buck off of the Jew. He wants to be able to carry in the courtyard on Shabbos. The fact that this news is not public means that anyone who sees this will assume that the Gentile was not paid off. And if the Gentile was not paid off, someone who sees the guy in the outer chutzner carrying is going to say, hey, the guy's violating Shabbos because he didn't pay off the Gentile. And he's not going to realize that since the Gentile is the sole resident, he doesn't impede the outer guy. And therefore we make a takana across the board, says Rabbi Elazar, that when there's a Gentile on the inner chutzner, he impedes the outer guy from carrying. Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now we got to go to one more halacha and then we'll hold it for today. Yud batim zelifnim mizeh. If you have 10 houses that are adjacent to each other, but they're all backing up to each other, which means that the guy in the 10th house has to walk through 9 other houses to get out to the street. It's this, talk about poor civic engineering. This is a guy, they built these houses without any other entryway other than going through the other houses to get out to the street. Now, we're going to see a halacha on DAF Pei Hey, which we're going to see Mirza Hashem next week in about 10 days. There's a halacha that states as follows: if my house is Grand Central Station, because multiple parties are constantly passing through my house as a passageway, then my house is not considered a duly constituted residence of a chutzner, and as such, I am not a legal resident of the chutzner, and as such, I do not have to contribute to the eruv in order to allow the residents of the chutzner to carry. That's a big chiddush. I lived there for 20 years. I sleep and eat in that house, but the fact that the house is used as a passageway by multiple individuals means that it doesn't have a din of a house, and it as a residence, and it doesn't impede the other members of the chutzner from carrying because it's not a house. The only time that I impede the other members of the chutzner from carrying is when I'm a duly constituted resident. But because my house is Grand Central Station, I'm not a resident.
You mean the chutzner around the house? Or
The chutzner around the house. The chutzner around the house has multiple residents, but I don't count as a resident because my house is not a house. And therefore, I don't have to contribute to the Eruv, and I don't impede the other members of the chutzner from carrying. So basically what the Gemara is now saying is that if you have these side-by-side houses, then the only person who needs to contribute to the Eruv that's in the chutzner where these houses empty out to is the guy in the last house, in the 10th house, because his house is the only house that's considered to be a real residence. The other 9 houses are not considered to be residences because they're Grand Central Station. Everyone's constantly walking in and out. So therefore, Yud Batim Zelifnim Mizeh Panimi Nosein Es Eruvo Vidayo. Only the guy in the 10th house, the back house, has to contribute to the Eruv in the Chatzar, and the other 9 houses do not. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu Chitzon. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even the outer guy, the implication meaning the guy that's closest to the Chatzar. So the Gemara says, Chitzon Beisharu. Why should he have to contribute? His house is Grand Central Station. It's just a passageway. So the Gemara answers, Chitzon Shel Pinimi. No, he means to say the 9th house. Meaning that according to Rabbi Yochanan, not only the guy in the 10th house, the back house, but the house in front of him also has to contribute. What? So what's the machlokus? B'maika miflagi. Mar savar beishar diyachid shmei beishar, mar savar lo shmei beishar. The machlokus is, what if my house is a passageway to only one person? It's my house, plus one person has rights of passage through that house. So one person says that that's called Grand Central Station, the other one says no, that's still called a duly constituted residence, and therefore you're a member of the Chaser and you have to contribute. That's the nafkamina, that if you hold that only the 10th guy has to contribute is because even the 9th house, where the 10th guy passes through, is Grand Central Station. But if you hold that the 9th guy has to contribute also because he's a real resident, why is that? Because only the 10th guy passes through his house. Now, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua, Amar Rav, Beis Chatzeros V'Gimel Batim B'Neim. This is really an extension of what we just saw. That if you have now the following scenario, you've got 3 houses adjacent to one another, and the 2 outer houses are abutting 2 different chatzers. Okay, so you've got 2 chatzers on either side, and you've got 3 houses stacked next to each other in between the 2. So zeh ba derech zeh v'nosein eruva bazeh, v'zeh ba derech zeh v'nosein eruva bazeh, zeh naaseh beishar lazeh, v'zeh naaseh beishar lazeh, and emtsoi havalei bayish sheminichim bo erev ve'en tzarach litein as hapas. So basically what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. No one in any of the 3 houses will ever have to contribute bread. The reason is because the 2 outer houses are not really duly constituted residences, because the members of the Chatzar pass through in order to get to the middle house, and the middle house has to pass through that outer house to get to the Chatzar. And that's true on both sides. So the 2 houses on the outside are not duly constituted residences, and therefore they don't have to contribute bread. The guy in the middle house also doesn't have to contribute bread because the Eruv is being deposited in his house. And as we learned before, when the Eruv is being made in your house, you don't have to contribute bread because your living in that house is in itself constitutes a declaration of residence, of incorporation. And therefore, none of the 3 houses, the residents of the 3 houses, have to contribute bread. The 2 outer houses because they're not proper residents, and the inner house is because the Eruv is being deposited in his house. We'll hold it here for today. Have a wonderful day.